to another edition of Chargers Unleashed. Jake Hefner and Dan Wolkenstein here with you from the LA Football Network. This is your first time tuning in this show. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Dan Wolkenstein, breathe it in. It feels good.
Finally.
Can you smell it in the air? We are back to Chargers football. Day one of training camp. Down in El Segundo at the Bolt. You knew the fans were going to be showing up for this one. Players back on the field. We're in the middle of drills. It is that calm before the preseason storm, as they may say, just reminding you that we are that much closer to the NFL regular season. And it started today out there on the field. We're going to cover all the biggest happenings of what took place out there, along with covering, obviously, some big quotes from the press conferences from Jim Harbaugh to Justin Herbert to Derwin James. A lot of things to talk about today, but of course, before we do that, Dan Wolkenstein, sir, how are you?
Oh, man, did it feel good to finally have training camp here. It's the dawn of a new era. You mentioned kind of the calm before the training camp storm. How apropos, we are the storm, they are the storm. The storm is coming. You can feel the storm. You see the lightning, feel the thunder, all of that stuff. We now get to see it. Justin Herbert in the golden jersey, Jim Harbaugh at the helm.
Wearing football cleats.
At the helm with football cleats.
Wearing cleats.
So much to discuss today. And I think, honestly, Jake, what's most exciting is that Chargers football is back.
Yes.
And we saw a lot of names, saw a lot of players there, some players who aren't there, which we'll get to as well. But I think we need to start this with just how refreshing this feels right now. And the temperature of the players and the coaching staff with the offseason is kind of turn the page, close the book. We're not reading that book from last year anymore. And boy, does this book read differently. And this first chapter starting today, must see. Before we get to all of that, Jake, let's quickly pay the bills. Talk about our friends.
I want to remind everybody that BetOnline remains your number one source for all of your sports betting needs this season, from baseball, golf, soccer, right up to the top fights of the UFC and the MMA and boxing. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are currently being played. When the game is over, head on over to the online casino, get on the game of blackjack, poker, or unwind with one of our 150 slot games. Head on over to the website today. That's betonline.ag to get in on the action. We use the promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit for up to $250. BetOnline, the game starts here.
So let's start off with kind of the big rocks, and then we'll kind of go into all the details of the press conference and takeaways. Big rocks. Junior Colson had appendicitis and had an appendix procedure. And a quick Google search. I'm not a doctor, but it looks like it's a couple weeks thing. Nothing
Everybody
crazy.
was Google searching recovery time from appendicitis when that news came down.
Yes. So, is it ideal? No. Is it that crazy in terms of how much impact it has on the football side of things? Maybe a little bit. Other news, Cam Hart, rookie 5th-round pick, had an interception today. Tony Jefferson also had an interception. PBUs from all kinds of secondary players. Quentin Johnston getting praise and looking sharp to start off training camp. And Derwin James is feeling like he gets to think less and play physical in this new Jesse Minter defense. Jake,
Like that.
Training camp is underway. What were some of your biggest takeaways or things that you thought were most important from today?
I mean, the trend that has taken place over the last number of years at Chargers training camp, but a lot of people, when they see this news, they kind of freak out and they think about it's like, wow, the defense was really dominant. What does that mean for the offense? No, it usually happens this way on the first day or even the first couple days of training camp, where the defense just comes out and has a great day. No, it does not mean that the offense is going to do poorly or anything like that. So it's nothing indicative of Justin Herbert and Greg Roman running this offense. Again, remind you guys, there's no pads on right now, but defensively, got to give some love to Cam Hart coming down with an interception. Obviously, there was in coverage from Jalen Johnson that he was on. That was a pass that was thrown by Easton Stick. Tony Jefferson, who just signed to the roster seemingly yesterday, gets an interception. Asante Samuel Jr. has a pass breakup deep in coverage on Cornelius Johnson. It was a great start for this defense. Denzel Perryman almost had a pass breakup over the middle. Could have came away with an interception. I believe he was actually. I could not tell from the actual footage. It looked like it was Donald Parham.
It did. I thought it was Donald Parham as well.
I just wanted to make sure. But the defense normally comes out hot on day one. And just, again, think about this for a second. As Dan mentioned a second ago, we're not reading that book anymore. That book was 2 years overdue, should have been returned to the library a long time ago.
Burned in the trash can.
Whatever it is, the sports almanac that was burned in the yeah. it's done with. It's gone. You're not seeing that anymore. This is a new book. There's new people reading it. There's new people teaching it. And you have to be excited about it. So early days, obviously, day one of training camp. I don't think there's anything to be worried about. Justin Herbert in the clips that was shown today looked sharp, and someone's been hitting the gym in the offseason. Whoa.
Yep.
Justin Herbert looked like he was about ready to pop out of that yellow jersey today.
Yes. Yeah. And that theme, I think, holds true for a few players. We'll talk about Quentin Johnston, some of the remarks that we heard from some of his teammates, as well as his coach, about how much stronger he's gotten this offseason. But you mentioned the defense, Jake, and the secondary specifically. They started to get heated up. And Derwin James talked about them kind of bringing the juice, and he was still kind of coming down from it when he had his press conference. But I thought this was interesting. And this speaks to the immediate change of the guard. They were bringing it, right? And you mentioned no pads. Jim Harbaugh talked about this afterwards. If you notice, for folks out there, the interception from Cam Hart is out there on social media. You can see the video. Great interception. But Jim Harbaugh talked about afterwards that there were some tempo violations towards the end of practice. And essentially what Jim Harbaugh was referring to, we talked about it in his press conference, we'll get to in a second. But basically, when there are no pads on, this coaching staff and Jim Harbaugh does not want these players jumping, diving for catches without pads. He doesn't want these receivers playing through the body or the corners playing through the body, no tackling. And while the Cam Hart interception was awesome, Jim Harbaugh understands the assignment here and getting these guys as healthy as possible for week one. And so while the interception was good, he said it's a vote of confidence to the team of like, whoa, you got to settle down. This team is amped up. And when we talked to Lohi Gilman at the Paradise Point, he talked about how hungry they are and kind of that chip on their shoulder from a year ago and what they have to prove. The secondary brought it today, and Derwin James alluded to it. But there's a time and a place. You got to play smart. And so those tempo violations and playing under control and playing the right way at the right times is important. And Jim Harbaugh went into a ton of detail about, when you have guys going up in the air and there's either two guys going up, that's four legs going down, there's so much potential for injury and you don't want to do that. And he has, Jim Harbaugh, analogies galore, talks about the plane taking off and talking about gliding and talking about giving birth and a new air, they're all there, right? But day one, you get some of the kinks out real quick. They got to play smart. And so while everybody is competitive and they got roster spots up for grabs, let's stay healthy.
And I stand corrected, Dan. The pass breakup, Asante Samuel Jr. actually had two of them. I believe the one that was downfield, the one that was being replayed the most, I thought it was Cornelius Johnson initially. I believe it was actually, I think it's now being reported that it was Brendan Rice that was on. But still, Dan, in general, as you were talking about, this whole tempo, while everybody's just expecting, it's like, okay, it's Jim Harbaugh, it's Jesse Minter, it's Greg Roman, the physicality, but still at the same time, I'm sure some of this has come from Ben Herbert as well to say, hey, look, I know I'm making you guys harder to break, but let's put our foot on the gas when it's necessary, when we absolutely need to.
Yeah. Harder to break, but don't tempt fate.
Exactly. You don't want to do that. And the Chargers have done that plenty of times in off seasons past, and we'd never like to revisit those type of days. So God forbid you would have one of those moments right now. Dan, you go back to one of the things that I actually liked, let's flip it to the opposite side of the ball here. It was good for the fact that you have J.K. Dobbins and Gus.
Gus Edwards.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Gus Edwards out there right now.
You can't think Gus Bradley.
For some reason, that was the name that was popping into my head. I'm like, that is not correct. So apologies for my flub up right there.
Edwards, Bradley, come on. They're both first names.
Yeah. Gus Edwards, he didn't end up participating in team drills, but he participated in individuals drills today. And it gets you thinking, Dad, like imagine what this is going to look like when these guys put the pads on and start running through. This is going to be a powerful running back unit. I'm not even just going to single out one person. I'm talking about the entire unit. And when the pads come on,
is a unit.
Yes. And when the pads come on and we start getting into these preseason games that aren't too far away now, I'm really going to be excited to see how they're going to deploy them. Another aspect of this whole running game and blocking scheme, Dan. Remember back last year when Jordan McFadden was being used sparingly as a fullback?
Mm-hmm.
Well, apparently Jim Harbaugh and company took wind of that and are keeping that trend going today, because not only were they moving Jordan McFadden around the second string offensive line, they were putting him at tight end, and they were putting him in as fullback in jumbo packages. So if they can put him more in those type of jumbo packages like they did last year, I would love that. They put him in as a jumbo tight end. They put him in as a jumbo tight end and fullback. To me, that's just, if you want to emphasize and put that exclamation point on power, I love it. I love it. Love that idea. So give me some more creativity to this offense, please.
I was going to say, give me the offensive line that is that big and beefy already, and then add a fullback offensive lineman. Like, why not? Give me that with Gus Edwards as running back. Like, can you imagine? Yes. Ooh. Will Dissly as your tight end blocking. I mean, good Lord. Could you imagine? I mean, they're going forward. They're not going backwards.
They're going to move. They're going to move some people. They are going to move some people. Last year, the Chargers couldn't move anybody. They're going to be able to move some people if they can carry this out properly.
And you know who has been moving some people in terms of how they handled the offseason and what they're looking like so far in training camp early is Quentin Johnston. And a lot of fans, rightfully so, have a lot of questions about Quentin Johnston and his ability and his role on this team, and if he can, quote unquote, bounce back from the rookie season he had. And we've heard nothing but good and praise from this coaching staff leading up to today. And today was the first where Chargers fans and folks got to see kind of the fruits of those. And again, it's one day, no pads, we'll see. But Quentin Johnston appeared to look sharp. According to Daniel Popper, he looked crisp in his routes. I think he was 3 of 4 on targets. According to Jim Harbaugh, he is looking stronger. I spent a lot of time with Ben Herbert on the strength side of things, combining strength with agility and speed and size, all those things. Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert both praised Quentin Johnston, talking about him kind of getting a bad rap from media and from folks outside the building, or maybe inside the building, I'm not sure, last year. But Quentin Johnston appears to be in the good graces of this coaching staff, I'll tell you that much. And Jim Harbaugh calls him one of the best guys on the team. So Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert, high praise for Quentin Johnston. Now, it's not just Quentin Johnston, obviously. The ball was thrown around to a bunch of people today. Stone Smart, Josh Palmer, DJ Chark, Quentin Johnston, all getting targets. But I think if Quentin Johnston can be the Quentin Johnston that they thought they were getting when they drafted him, and be the Quentin Johnston that played against Jim Harbaugh while he was at Michigan, that's a Quentin Johnston I'd like to see more of.
When we talked about this, Dan, earlier in the week, the whole idea, from Daniel Popper's article that came about him essentially being wide receiver 4 and people taking that as a negative for Quentin Johnston. In reality, it's just, again, you look at Joshua Palmer, you look at Ladd McConkey, and you look at DJ Chark. To me, they have the 3 receiver set that they know as of today. Does not mean that anything cannot change, But that's the three receiver set that you know that's starting right now. Two of those wide receivers have built up so much rapport with Justin Herbert. One exclusively to the best usage of him where he can be utilized in this offense in DJ Chark. He's going to be your X receiver. That's where he makes his money. You know you still need some development with Quentin Johnston. When we talked about the comments from Sanjay Lal when he was mentioning Quentin Johnston's rookie year, when they were talking during minicamp a few months ago. And then even Quentin Johnston himself being humble enough to accept what took place. Like I told you, I think that they watched last year's film one time and they will never watch it again. Jim Harbaugh knows what Quentin Johnston is capable of. Fiesta Bowl. He said even today during his press conferences, he still has bruises from that game about what Quentin Johnston did to him in that game. So whether it's wide receiver 4 right now, I don't really care. I'm not looking at the wide receiver rankings at this point in time to mean something indicative of where Quentin Johnston is. If he needs this time to develop during this portion of training camp to gear up for a better season for himself, so be it. So be it. I'm totally fine with that. But apparently today he was looking better. He was creating better separation between him and the DBs. And that's what you need out of him. He was never really that type of a big-time separator guy coming out of college, only when it came to certain things that he was able to do, whether it was just straight out running them. He needs to develop more to his game, and I think that's what this Chargers team wants of him. They're going to build him up in a new image, but in what accentuates the strengths of what he does well for this team. So it's a great first step for Quentin Johnston. I'm excited to see how this is going to progress over the next few weeks. Him by being wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, whatever you want to call it at this point in time, fine. Good. I guarantee you it's not going to matter come Sundays because they will figure out ways to utilize him.
Yeah, I'm with you. A couple other quick notes before we get to the press conference takeaways. Interior defensive line, Jake, looks like Scott Matlock and Poona Ford are the starters as of right now. Deion Henley and Denzel Perryman, with Junior Colts we mentioned out, the starting middle linebackers. Jazir Taylor, Asante Samuel Jr., and Christian Fulton, starting corners. Jazir Taylor obviously in the slot. Joe Alt, of course, right tackle. Trey Pipkins, right guard. Nothing's changed there. It was good. You mentioned it was good to see Dobbins and Edwards. I almost did it. It's good to see Dobbins and Edwards.
Appreciate you trying to cover for me on that one.
Together there. And Jim Harbaugh alluded to or said that he went through an off-season surgery. Gus Edwards did. And so has that runway that they're trying to get him before he can take off. So letting him into the wild, so to speak, slowly but surely. But that kind of does it for the takeaway component of the things on the field. Anything else from you, Jake, before we get to the podium stuff?
Yeah, I'm going to be interested to see how that interior defensive line shakes out because it didn't look like Justin Ebogbe was with the second stringers. That was Christopher Hinton and Morgan Fox in terms of your interior defensive linemen behind Poona Ford and Scott Matlock. So it'll be interesting to see over time where he ends up because I know obviously from what we've heard from Jesse Minter and obviously if you listen to the Trevor McHugh when he joined us last week, he's a versatile chess piece for the interior defensive line. So I'm very interested to see how these next few weeks progress for him. Outside of that, hey, sounded like a pretty damn good practice to start off training camp for the Chargers.
Yeah, shout out to the beat writers there in person. Chris Rim from ESPN, The Athletics, Daniel Popper, of course, and Eric Smith from the Chargers, all putting out stuff to help us with recaps and help us figure out what's going on there. The eyes and ears at the scene, which we will be doing our own here in a few short days. Jake, press conferences from the three leaders of this team. Jim Harbaugh, of course, at the helm, and then Derwin James and Justin Herbert after him. Jake, let's start with Jim Harbaugh. And, you mentioned the cleats. Like he comes right off the practice and walks in, strolls in, talking about how this training camp feels like, coming out of the womb. It's a new life. It's a new place. And, we all know we were going to get Jim Harbaugh isms, but he is not disappointing. Jim Harbaugh is a character, and everyone loves him, and everyone respects and praises him. But it's just, again, I go back to that refreshing component. It's just a different vibe. It is a different vibe, and a lot of players talked about it, literally about the different vibe, which we'll get to at Derwin James here in a second. But a couple takeaways I had from Jim Harbaugh, Jake. The notes he had about Greg Roman, he was asked about kind of what it's like working with him. And basically he says, to give him the highest compliment possible, he's just a football coach. He's a football guy. Sees him as an elite chess player type with his ability to think so many steps ahead. And he calls him a master class when it comes to football. On the Cam Hart interception, how Cam Hart's been looking, loves his length, his instincts, feels like he's strong, compared him to a little bit like Derwin James, and says he has an ability to go a long way in the NFL. And on Quentin Johnston, again, I mentioned before, he said he felt like he had a bad rap, but he sees him as big, fast, strong, and he's getting stronger, which I think was the biggest part for him. But he's been nothing but happy with Quentin Johnston. And again, he says one of our top guys right now. And then a couple other things. Loves Josh Palmer. Already a go-to guy for him. Mentioned how good he was the offseason.
Don't
how much
sleep
trust
on
he
Josh
had
Palmer.
in the team. Mentioned how much trust he has in the training staff. Shout out to Marco Zacconi, I believe is his name, for the athletic training staff being as impressive as they are. It's not that coaches in the past haven't stood up for their players, because they have, but it feels different. It feels different with Jim Harbaugh, would you say?
I mean, it depends on who you're asking, because it's funny, when you say it feels different. For example, Trevor McHugh retweets his quote when he's talking about, it feels like Christmas Day. You're coming out of the womb, day one. And Trevor McHugh says, that's the same guy that I've been familiar with for 10 years. You talk to the Chargers fans.
Same Jim Harbaugh, different Chargers.
Exactly. You talk to Chargers fans and other people that are covering this team. I mean, I think we've known that it's been feeling different now for the past few months in press conferences that we've heard Jim Harbaugh speak. But now we're in the thick of it, Dan. Now we're actually talking about getting serious about football. And you're able to elaborate a little bit more on what the game plan is going to be, and where the focus is going, what the strengths are going to be of certain guys, what they need to work on. I liked how Jim Harbaugh just came out and said, as it relates to Quentin Johnston, you mentioned a couple of those quotes there, Dan, but just flat out saying he's going to be a problem for people. I'm telling you right now, there's a different way to instill confidence in other individuals. And again, most head coaches would of course give encouragement, but probably to say, he's coming along well, give you just, the vanilla type of answer that we covering this franchise have probably heard for a long time. But when you make some of the statements about Quentin Johnston, as Jim Harbaugh did today, that pricks your ears up, because we all know that last year is a year that we want to forget about as it relates to Quentin Johnston's rookie season. Quentin Johnston wants to forget that year himself. So what is this Quentin Johnston going to look like in this offense?
He talked about him, his ability to pluck it in the air. He's talking about things that go in direct contrast with what a lot of us have seen or have heard or believe about Quentin Johnston. And again, we've all heard how good a work ethic he has, and how good of a head on his shoulders he is, and how humble he is, and how much of a workhorse he is, and how much he's wanting to be good. We've heard all of that. But this is the first day, and this will be the time we get to start seeing those. And again, it's a results business. And there were times, I remember last year, there were times early on training camp where the Chargers put out videos of him saying, I thought he couldn't catch, because he, plucked the ball out of the air on I think it was a fade touchdown grab. Single highlights here and there. That's not what is going to make or break Quentin Johnston. It's going to be when the games start.
Yeah,
but
you piggyback that off of what Justin Herbert said just a few moments later when he said he's come back this year with great effort, great attitude, a great guy to be around, great locker room guy. We're expecting big things from him this year. It all starts with Quentin Johnston, obviously.
Yep.
How does he come back to attack everything that was said about him last year? And it's encouraging so far.
It is. It is. And then when you get to the rest of the press conferences, Derwin James got to speak the press conference. And I don't know about you, Jake, but Derwin James is, especially in front of the cameras, he doesn't really say much. He usually gives pretty short answers. And he is definitely an emotional player and person. I don't remember seeing Derwin James smile this much at a press conference. Literally, I don't want to say ever, but I can't remember the last time I've seen him look this happy. And talk about refreshed. He talked about kind of this being a new day and doesn't want to ever talk about the years past, doesn't want to talk about last year anymore. He's over it. And it was a very stark and different Derwin James. And he talked about being able to feel the different vibe and energy, talk about the juice that was out there today, and how motivated he and the defense was coming off of last year. And also gave praise to his head coach about the contagious leadership and energy he brings to this team. The part that I thought was most impactful from Derwin James, when he was asked about his comfortability in Jesse Minter's defense, his answer to this I thought was telling. Quote, "I'm able to play fast and physical and not think as much," end quote. He went on to talk about it being because of the meeting room structure, Jesse Minter's defense of teaching, scheme structure, and Jesse Minter's constant reminder to Derwin James that he is Derwin James. And seeing Derwin talk about this specific part and him grinning ear to ear about being able to play and think less and all, it gave me kind of goosebumps thinking about what could be with Derwin James, maybe playing a little bit less of a role. Not that he's less impactful, but less roles on this team day within game to game. So Derwin James getting to think less, that was the part to me that was big.
The stacking of bricks that Jesse Minter has done by telling us exactly what he wanted to do for one of his focal points on defense was to get Derwin James back into 2018 form. And just think about that for a second. 2018 Derwin is basically a rookie. Think about all the knowledge that Derwin has acquired since then. And you mean to tell me that you're going to try to get him back to that? Jesse Minter, again, as Dan said, reminding him, let's get you back to being one of the best safeties in the league. We've all talked about for so many years now, whether it was in a Gus Bradley scheme or a Brandon Staley scheme, that the focal point we knew, the ultimate chess piece, was Derwin James. And this secondary essentially, especially save face for corner, relies heavily on him. But over the last couple of years, it's relied too heavy on Derwin James.
Yes.
So him saying quotes now about, I'm not having to think too much, I can more just react, be where I want to be. You got to get excited about where number 3 is going to be on the field and what he's going to be doing.
Yeah, and what was he ranked? Again, these rankings don't mean much, but his top 100 ranking, Jake, did you see what it came in at? Number 83 for Derwin James. You don't think that's bulletin board material for him?
Sure.
Oof. So I think he's going to remind folks real quick who he is and what he can do. Also gave praise to Cam Hart.
He's a Cam Hart guy. He's a Cam Hart guy.
Loves Cam Hart. Quote, I love Cam Hart. I'm a big Cam Hart fan. Looks like a basketball player. The sky is the limit for him. Cam Hart today, you got praise from Jim Harbaugh, got praise from Derwin James, talking about his length, his size, his instincts, his ability to close. Talk about kind of got freakish athleticism. The sky's the limit. him being a good play for a long time. Again, that gets you excited. And the Chargers need that in a developing corner. And again, we talked about him being a steal in the 5th round. I was freaking out. I'm not gonna lie. I was freaking out because
I was just going to transition this to you because you've been saying the one thing that is bothering you the most, even still as we are doing this show and probably still will for the next few weeks, is the secondary depth.
Yep.
And on top of that, Christian Fulton had himself a pass breakup today. And now you hear the lauding for Cam Hart and how they feel about him and him coming down with an interception. So it's a good start for one of the bigger or one of the units that has one of the bigger question marks surrounding it. Because to Dan's point, it's a valid reason to be somewhat concerned. But if
there's no proven entity on this secondary cornerback room specifically. It's all based on potential and prior experience, not in the NFL, really.
To keep your sanity, Dan, you may have to go back and have that Steve Clinkscale press conference on repeat on loop so you can sleep at night.
I know. And you know what it is? Jake, is, we talked about, I think what I've really liked about this coaching staff and Joe Ortiz specifically, this is a side tangent for a second, but they've brought in contingency plans for everything. And I think that's what is a little alarming and concerning to me is this is one of the few areas that they don't really have contingency plans on. The wide receiver room, they brought in a bunch. Linebacker, they brought in a bunch. I'd probably say interior defensive line and corner are the two that I'm concerned about. Maybe, I guess, backup center, but there's some options there. But everything else, they have stuff where if the hope and potential doesn't add up, they've got guys ready to go. If Cam Hart and Christian Fulton or Jazir Taylor, who, again, I don't know how great he's looked, but Tarheeb still, these are all hope and potential. If they don't go, it's going down quick. So that's why I get concerned, because there is no contingency plans with those players. But again, I digress. You're right. Great day for the corners and secondary so far. They brought the juice today. Hopefully it stays. I would love to be wrong. Trust me. I would love to be wrong and see these guys do great. I just don't know if it's worth the risk if they're not. But I digress. Talked about, you mentioned a lot this offseason, the versatility that Steve Clinkscale is asking of these guys. And Derwin James alluded to it too, talking about how the corners and safeties are both playing different and the same roles interchangeably because they're learning all the different roles because they don't know what their defensive pairings are going to be yet, what the best pairings are for individual matchups. Great. Yes, please. Give me that.
Why not? Why not? It sounded like today, probably what you thought. It was Asante Samuel Jr., Christian Fulton, Jazir Taylor as in your nickel package, that was your starting cornerback trio. But again, that quote from Steve Clinkscale just still resonates with me in terms of how this secondary is going to be moved around, utilized, play to their strength. I will keep saying that message because it goes from Jim Harbaugh down to the rest of all the assistant coaches in terms of what they want to do for each one of their player groups. And yeah, you have to be excited about it, Dan. Now, I was going to say this a second ago when you were talking about, strictly relying on this secondary on hope and this and that and the other. It's and not to say that that's not an invalid reason to have concern, because I fully understand it. But remember, the Chargers have had some big name free agents flame out and other guys that have had great seasons and then disappeared for others. And sometimes you've even said this on the show, Dan, they went the way of swinging for the fences in free agency, and look where that got them.
I'm not saying swing for the fences.
No. I'm not saying that you're saying that either. I'm just saying there's that phrase called young and hungry. Mm-hmm. And all it takes is the right type of catalyst to get it to work properly. So I'm not here to toot the horn of the secondary and say we should all have these giant expectations for these group of guys. But at the same time, we've all said that coaching, especially for this team, has been a huge X factor on the difference between winning and losing games. Now the staff that's essentially been rebuilt from the foundation and that is in charge of coaching up every one of these position groups, it seems like, as Derwin James was talking about today, it's infectious, it's contagious. You want to be a part of it. Good start for some of the new faces in the secondary.
Can a guy just get some veteran presence on the DB room? Like, that's all I want.
Can I get one? Can I get one?
Just give me one.
Let me buy a vowel, please.
Gosh, that's all I'm asking for. Last one, Jake. The golden boy, the golden jersey, the man himself, Justin Herbert, at the podium today. And you mentioned how that shirt's looking a little tight.
Yeah.
I don't know if he went shopping at the rack too small or he's getting too big. I'm kidding. He fits great in that jersey. He definitely has put on weight and muscle since the last time we've seen him. I think there are some side-by-sides out there on Twitter of him before and after. Takeaways from Justin Herbert, Jake.
There is no question that this is body by Ben Herbert behind this.
TM.
Yes. Trademark it, whatever it is you need to call
body
it.
By Ben.
we saw the photos early in organized team activities when everybody was hitting the gym. I mean, we've already obviously seen the transformation that Zion Johnson has put in 1 year. And now look at your quarterback. Obviously, we don't expect that strength to be there for him getting hit by defensive linemen. No, we expect that strength to be there for much better reasons when it comes to throwing the ball downfield, being more precise, utilizing his legs when he has to. So it's a great showing for him. It's just like, to me, I just thought all he really needed to do was just stand there in front of the camera for 10 seconds and then just walk away and just like, fine. I don't even really care what he has to say because he looks great and he looks like he's been transformed in a single offseason.
Yeah. And Justin Herbert, he's so good at the podium in terms of just he's what you want your quarterback to sound like and look like at the podium. He's so well put together, doesn't ever say too much, doesn't ever say the wrong thing. But the things he did say today, a couple things here as we get going towards the end of the show. Also praised Jim Harbaugh's energy and his leadership, and basically everybody else has praised Jim Harbaugh as well. And Justin Herbert just gets in line of the rest of them doing it. Agreed with Jim Harbaugh on Quentin Johnston and acknowledged how hard it is as a rookie and talked about how good he's been this offseason, his work ethic and attitude and his locker room presence. A couple of things that he mentioned about the coaching staff. He was asked about Greg Roman, and he talked about how much he's learned from him and how smart of a coach he is and how intertwined Greg Roman is in all areas of the meeting rooms, both run and pass. And he specifically talked about the way that he is able to marry the run and the pass game, his ability to set up the run, play action, opening up the pass game, and kind of how connected he is to all the rooms that make that happen. And we've all seen it, how effective he's been. He's arguably the best at it, especially the run game. So the part that I liked about Justin Herbert, though, Jake, was he was asked about the brain trust and how important that has been for him and how much influence it has been. And you and I, Jake, have talked about the importance of the brain trust and how big this coaching staff is and the benefits that it brings. And Justin Herbert basically looked like he was just reading off our notes because talked about how helpful, how approachable everybody is, how much knowledge there is. Talked about Mark Trestman and Marcus Brady and Greg Roman and Shane Day and how everybody is able to, collaborate so willingly. And I don't think people talk about this enough. Like, Justin Herbert has a staff now that I think we've all wanted him to have. And the amount of experience this staff has and can give to this team is invaluable. And it's, again, another stark contrast of this regime versus previous regimes and the types of coaching generally, and there's always going to be exceptions, but generally the type of staff that's coming in. new up-and-comers, first-timers, whatever they are, versus established veteran. Sprinkle in some of those new coaches, but it's a mixture. That brain trust is huge. And if it's impacting your quarterback, you damn well know it's impacting the rest of the team.
I was trying to remember, Dan, who it was that actually said it when you were talking. I mean, maybe it was even Trevor McHugh that had mentioned it. But again, the comparisons between when Brandon Staley left the Rams and came to the Chargers, there weren't a lot of, we thought, again, there was going to be this mass exodus, whether it was coaches or players alike that were going to follow him to play with this team. That wasn't the case. When it came to Joe Lombardi, we know that wasn't his first choice for the offensive coordinator. His first choice went somewhere else. And so you mentioned this from a standpoint of Jim Harbaugh, this brain trust. Look at how many people have come over to now create this new look for the franchise from a coaching perspective. It's just absolutely ridiculous from the standpoint that Jim Harbaugh can pull a handful of coaches after winning a national championship game. His defensive coordinator, his secondary coach, his defensive line, the most important strength and conditioning. And then you go back and you rekindle some old ties with Greg Roman, and then you listen in a way to your own quarterback to say, what is it that you really need? Who did you have a great relationship with, or who would you have a great relationship with? I need Shane Day again. And you go out and you make that priority and go get him to be a part of this team. That's something that you could not even tell me that 20 years ago could have happened. And the closest thing to it would probably have been the Marty days, but that wasn't anything from a prior relationship. That relationship built up and developed. You've never seen anything like this for this Chargers team. So, as you mentioned it, Justin Herbert has a cachet of coaches and experience that he essentially can go anywhere to help himself grow, develop, get better. And I love the fact that how he kind of gave you a little bit of a peek behind the curtain for, again, anybody still wondering that Greg Roman is going to take the football out of Justin Herbert's hands. No, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. He's only going to give Justin Herbert something that he has not had successfully and consistently for a number of different years. You had a good running back on the fantasy numbers in Austin Eckler for a couple of years. But in terms of a productive run game, Justin Herbert hasn't had that. So, yeah. So be excited about the pieces that are now around Justin Herbert. Personally, I don't think that he's going to have a favorite target either, Dan. Third and Keenan, unfortunately, those days are gone. But if it means that Justin Herbert can tell a defense, you think you know who I'm going to throw it to now on third down? Think again. I like having more options than less options. And if Justin Herbert can start being that type of quarterback that spreads the ball around, regardless of what name is on the back of the jersey, we're in for some fun.
We are. Training camp is back. Day one in the books. We will be doing these throughout the next several weeks because we know how important these training camps are, both to our listeners and viewers, but also to this team. And so we will be there at camp shortly. So stay tuned. Day one in the books.
Feels good.
We got some nuggets too.
Feels good. Excited to go down to El Segundo this week.
Yep.
The contingent of the fan base that is going to be down at the Bolt later on this week is going to be fantastic. Cannot wait to see a lot of familiar faces that are the Chargers faithful that always go to every training camp. And the atmosphere is going to be, no pun intended, absolutely electric.
Yes. So, Jake, this has been fun. Can't wait. These are the best times. I love doing these training camp recaps and overviews and takeaways and seeing how excited this fan base is for this. I can't remember a training camp that had this much hype and this much excitement with a new regime. And like a new regime brings excitement regardless, but this one feels different. We've always said it. I know it's cliche, but we'll be here every step of the way. For Jake Hefner, I'm Dan Wolkenstein. This is Chargers. We'll talk to you next time. Stay cool. We'll talk to you soon.